The boy was sitting on the cold concrete steps when the first drops of rain started falling. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders and pressed his back against the wall behind him. It was October in the city, and the nights were getting colder with each passing week. He had learned to find small corners where the wind couldn't reach him, places where security guards wouldn't notice him right away. Tonight, he had chosen the back entrance of the Grand Heritage Concert Hall, a massive old building made of stone and glass that stood in the heart of downtown. He was only 14 years old, but life had already taught him things that most adults never have to learn. He knew which restaurant dumpsters had the freshest leftovers. He knew which park benches were safe to sleep on and which ones would get him chased away by police. He knew how to become invisible in a crowd, how to walk with his head down so that people's eyes would slide right past him like he wasn't even there. Most days, that's exactly what he was to the world. Nothing, nobody, just another homeless kid that people stepped around on the sidewalk. But there was one thing about him that nobody knew. One thing that set him apart from every other person sleeping on the streets of this city. And it was the reason he kept coming back to this concert hall, night after night. Even when there were warmer places he could have gone, he came here for the music. Every evening, around 7 o'clock, the concert hall would come alive. Fancy cars would pull up to the front entrance, and men and women in expensive clothes would walk through the golden doors. From his spot at the back of the building, the boy couldn't see any of that, but he could hear what happened next. He could hear the orchestra warming up, the scattered notes of violins and cellos mixing together like a conversation, in a language only musicians understand. And then, when the concert began, he could hear the music floating through the walls, soft and muffled, but still beautiful enough to make his heart ache. He would close his eyes and lean his head back against the cold stone. And for a little while, he wasn't a homeless kid with holes in his shoes and an empty stomach. He was somewhere else entirely. He was back home, in the small apartment where he used to live with his mother. He was sitting next to her on the piano bench, watching her fingers dance across the black and white keys like they had a life of their own. His mother had been the one who taught him everything about music. She wasn't famous. She never played in big concert halls or had her name in newspapers. She gave piano lessons to kids in the neighborhood to pay the bills, and sometimes she played at weddings or small events on the weekends. But when she sat down at her old upright piano in their living room, something magical happened. The whole apartment would fill with sound, and the boy would sit on the floor beside her, completely hypnotized. She started teaching him when he was just 4 years old. At first, it was simple things. Mary Had a Little Lamb, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, songs that every beginner learns. But it didn't take long for her to realize that her son was different. He didn't just learn the notes. He felt them. By the time he was 6, he was playing pieces that most teenagers struggled with. By 8, he could hear a song once and play it back perfectly from memory. His mother used to joke that he had music living inside his bones. She had dreams for him. Big dreams. She would talk about famous concert halls and standing ovations, about scholarships to music schools, and competitions where judges would be amazed by his talent. At night, before he went to sleep, she would sit on the edge of his bed and tell him that his gift was going to take him places she had never been able to go. She made him promise that no matter what happened in life, he would never stop playing. He had promised her with all his heart. But life doesn't always care about promises. When the boy was 11, his mother got sick. At first, nobody thought it was serious. She was tired a lot, and she had headaches that wouldn't go away. She went to the doctor, and then to more doctors, and then to a hospital where they ran tests for weeks. When the results came back, everything changed. The word they used was cancer. The boy didn't fully understand what it meant at the time, but he understood the look on his mother's face when she came home that day. He understood the way she held him so tight that night, like she was afraid to let go. The next 2 years were the hardest of his life. His mother fought as long as she could. There were treatments and surgeries, and long nights in hospital rooms that smelled like cleaning supplies and sadness. Through it all, she kept telling him to practice. Even when she was too weak to get out of bed, she would ask him to play for her. He would sit at the piano and play her favorite songs, and sometimes he would see tears rolling down her cheeks, but she would always smile and tell him how proud she was. She passed away 3 weeks after his 13th birthday. The boy still remembered standing at her funeral, staring at the closed casket, and feeling like someone had reached inside his chest and pulled out everything that mattered. The apartment felt empty without her. The piano sat silent in the corner, and he couldn't bring himself to touch it. Every time he looked at those keys, he saw her hands, and the pain was too much to bear. His father had never been around much, even before his mother got sick. He showed up at the funeral, said a few words the boy couldn't remember, and then disappeared again. The boy was sent to live with a distant relative he had never met, an uncle who made it clear from the first day that he didn't want the responsibility of raising someone else's kid. 6 months later, the uncle kicked him out over an argument about something small and stupid. The boy found himself standing on the street with nothing but a backpack full of clothes and a photograph of his mother that he kept in his pocket. That was almost 2 years ago. Since then, he had learned how to survive. He found shelters when he could, slept outside when he couldn't. He collected cans for spare change and stood outside grocery stores hoping for handouts. Somewhere along the way, he stopped hoping that things would get better. He just focused on making it through each day, one at a time. But he never forgot about the music. That was why he kept coming back to this concert hall, night after night. It was the only connection he had left to the life he used to have, to the mother who believed in him, to the boy he used to be before everything fell apart. When he closed his eyes and listened to the orchestra playing inside, he could almost pretend that none of it had happened. He could almost feel her sitting beside him again. Tonight, like every other night, he pressed his ear against the cold stone wall and listened. The orchestra was playing something slow and sad, full of strings and soft piano notes that made his throat feel tight. He stayed there for hours, not moving, barely breathing, letting the music wrap around him like a blanket. He had no way of knowing that this was the last night he would spend invisible. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. The next evening was different from all the others. The boy noticed it as soon as he arrived at the concert hall. There were more cars than usual, long black limousines and shiny sports cars lining up along the street. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering dresses walked up the red carpet that had been rolled out in front of the main entrance. Photographers stood behind velvet ropes, their camera flashes lighting up the early darkness like little explosions of lightning. The boy watched from across the street, trying to figure out what was happening. He had seen fancy events at the concert hall before, but nothing quite like this. There were even television cameras set up near the entrance, and a woman with perfect hair was speaking into a microphone while someone held a bright light in front of her face. Whatever was happening tonight, it was something big. He should have stayed away. He knew that. On nights like this, security was always tighter. The guards would be watching for anyone who looked like they didn't belong. And in his torn jacket and dirty shoes, the boy definitely didn't belong. But something pulled him closer anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the music he could already hear drifting through the open doors. Or maybe it was just the warmth of all those lights calling to him on a cold October night. He crossed the street and found a spot near the side of the building, close enough to see inside, but far enough to stay out of trouble. Through the tall glass windows, he could see the lobby filled with people holding champagne glasses and laughing at things he couldn't hear. And right there, in the center of it all, sitting on a small raised platform like a piece of art in a museum, was the most beautiful piano he had ever seen. It was a grand piano, the kind that cost more money than most people would ever make in their entire lives. Its surface was polished to a perfect shine, reflecting the golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling above. The boy felt his breath catch in his throat. He hadn't touched a piano in almost 2 years. His fingers had forgotten what the keys felt like. But looking at that instrument now, something inside him woke up, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. He didn't realize how close he had moved until a voice made him jump. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" A security guard was walking toward him, his face stern and unfriendly. The boy took a step back, ready to run like he always did. But before the guard could reach him, a group of teenagers came spilling out of a side door, laughing loudly and pushing each other around. They were dressed in expensive clothes, The kind that probably cost more than everything the boy owned put together. One of them, a tall kid with slicked-back hair and a smug expression, spotted the boy standing there and stopped. "Whoa, look at this," the tall kid said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They're letting anyone in tonight, huh?" His friends laughed. There were 4 of them in total. 3 boys and a girl. And they all had the same look on their faces. It was a look the boy had seen many times before, the look of people who had never known what it felt like to be hungry, or cold, or afraid. The look of people who saw someone like him and felt nothing but disgust. "You lost or something?" the tall kid continued, stepping closer. "The soup kitchen is on the other side of town, buddy." More laughter. The security guard had stopped walking, watching the scene with an uncertain expression. He seemed unsure whether to intervene or let the rich kids have their fun. The boy didn't say anything. He had learned a long time ago that words didn't help in situations like this. The best thing to do was stay quiet and wait for it to be over. But tonight, the tall kid didn't seem interested in letting him go easily. "What's the matter? Can't talk? Or did you forget how, after living in a dumpster for so long?" One of the other boys snickered. "Maybe he's here for the concert. Maybe he's a big fan of classical music." "Oh yeah?" The tall kid's eyes lit up with a cruel kind of amusement. "You like music, homeless guy? You want to go inside and listen to the fancy orchestra?" The boy stayed silent. His heart was beating fast, but he kept his face calm. He had survived worse than a few mean words from kids who had never struggled for anything in their lives. Then the tall kid noticed the piano through the window. A slow smile spread across his face, and the boy knew immediately that something bad was about to happen. "Tell you what," the tall kid said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'll make you a deal. You see that piano in there? If you can walk in there and play something, anything at all, I'll give you $100. Cash. Right now." He pulled out his wallet and waved a crisp bill in the air. His friends were already pulling out their phones, ready to record whatever embarrassing thing was about to happen. "Come on, it'll be funny," the tall kid said. "Just walk in there, bang on the keys a little bit, and the money is yours. Unless you're too scared. Unless you know you don't belong in a place like this." For a long moment, nobody moved. The security guard was reaching for his radio, ready to call for backup. The other teenagers were giggling and whispering to each other, and the boy just stood there, looking through the window at that beautiful piano, feeling something stir inside his chest. He thought about walking away. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But then he thought about his mother. He thought about the promise he had made to her, the promise to never stop playing. He thought about all the nights he had spent outside this building, listening to music he couldn't see, dreaming about a life he used to have. Before he could change his mind, he started walking toward the entrance. The security guard moved to block him, but then a woman's voice cut through the noise. "Wait. Let him through." Everyone turned to look. A woman in her 50s was standing just inside the door. She had gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore a simple black dress with a pearl necklace. There was something about her face, something kind but also sad, like she had seen a lot of pain in her life and learned to recognize it in others. "Ma'am, this kid doesn't have an invitation," the security guard said. "He's just some homeless." "I can see what he is," the woman interrupted gently. "And I'm telling you to let him through. I want to see what happens." The guard hesitated, but the woman clearly had authority here. She gave a small nod, and he stepped aside reluctantly. The tall kid looked confused. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. "Hey, we were just joking around. We didn't actually think." "You offered him a challenge," the woman said, her eyes never leaving the boy's face. "Let's see if he accepts." The boy stood at the threshold, looking into the bright, warm lobby full of people who had everything while he had nothing. His legs felt weak, his hands were shaking. Every instinct told him to turn around and disappear back into the shadows where he belonged. But his mother's voice was louder than his fear. He walked inside. The lobby fell quiet as he moved through the crowd. People stepped back to let him pass, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. A few of them whispered to each other, pointing at his ragged clothes and dirty sneakers. He could feel their eyes on him like a physical weight, judging him, dismissing him, waiting for him to fail. But he didn't look at any of them. He only looked at the piano. When he reached it, he stopped. Up close, it was even more beautiful than it had seemed through the window. The keys were perfectly white and black, untouched and waiting. He reached out and ran his fingers along the smooth wood of the case, feeling a connection he hadn't felt in 2 years. The tall kid had followed him inside with his friends. They had their phones raised, recording everything. "Well?" he called out. "Go ahead. Show us what you got." The woman in the black dress had moved closer too. She was watching the boy with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between hope and heartbreak. The boy sat down on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys, and for one terrible moment, he was afraid that he had forgotten everything. That the music his mother had put inside him had died along with her, leaving nothing behind but silence. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he began to play. The first note was soft. So soft that the people standing at the back of the lobby almost didn't hear it. But for those who were close enough, that single note was enough to make them stop talking. It hung in the air for just a moment, pure and clear, like the first drop of rain before a storm. Then came the second note. And the third. And suddenly, the boy's fingers were moving across the keys like they had never forgotten anything at all. He was playing one of his mother's favorite pieces. It was a song she used to play on Sunday mornings while the sunlight came through the windows of their small apartment. He remembered sitting on the floor in his pajamas, eating cereal and watching her hands move like they were painting pictures in the air. She had taught him this piece when he was 9 years old, making him practice it over and over until his fingers ached. At the time, he didn't understand why she pushed him so hard. Now, sitting at this beautiful piano, in front of all these strangers, he finally understood. She had been preparing him for this moment, a moment when he would need the music more than he had ever needed anything in his life. The lobby had gone completely silent. Nobody was whispering anymore. Nobody was looking at their phones or checking the time or thinking about the champagne getting warm in their hands. Every single person in that room was staring at the homeless boy in the torn jacket, watching his dirty fingers dance across the pristine white keys, listening to sounds that didn't seem possible. The piece started gentle, almost like a lullaby. The melody floated up toward the high ceiling, wrapping around the crystal chandeliers and settling over the crowd like a warm blanket. A woman near the front pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes already filling with tears. She didn't know why she was crying. She just knew that something about this music was reaching a place inside her that she had forgotten existed. Then the tempo changed. The boy's left hand began moving faster, adding depth and power to the melody. The notes came quicker now, building on top of each other like waves rushing toward the shore. There was pain in this music. Anyone could hear it. The kind of pain that comes from losing something precious, something that can never be replaced. But there was also beauty, the kind of beauty that only exists because of the pain, like a flower growing through a crack in the concrete. The tall kid who had started all of this stood frozen near the entrance. His phone was still in his hand, still recording, but his arm had dropped to his side. His mouth was hanging open slightly. He had expected to capture a funny video of some homeless kid embarrassing himself. He had expected to laugh and share it with his friends later. Instead, he was watching something he couldn't explain, something that made him feel small and stupid and ashamed. The woman in the black dress had moved even closer to the piano. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. She just stood there, watching the boy with an expression of pure wonder. In her 40 years of working in the music industry, she had heard thousands of performances. She had discovered talents and launched careers and sat in the front row of concert halls all over the world. But she had never, not once in all those years, heard anything quite like this. This wasn't just talent. This was something deeper. This was a soul pouring itself out through an instrument, telling a story that words could never capture. This was grief and love and hope and despair, all mixed together into something that was almost too beautiful to bear. The boy didn't see any of this. His eyes were still closed, and in his mind, he was somewhere else entirely. He was back in that small apartment with the peeling wallpaper and the radiator that never worked properly. He was sitting next to his mother on the old piano bench, feeling her shoulder pressed against his as she guided his hands across the keys. He could smell her perfume, the cheap kind she bought from the drugstore on the corner. He could hear her voice, soft and patient, telling him that he was special, that his gift was going to change his life someday, that no matter what happened, she would always be proud of him. Tears began to roll down the boy's cheeks, but he didn't stop playing. If anything, his fingers moved with even more passion, pulling every ounce of emotion from the piano and sending it out into the room. The music swelled and crashed and whispered and roared, taking everyone who heard it on a journey they hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. A businessman in an expensive suit stood near the bar, completely motionless. He had come to this gala to network, to shake hands with potential clients, to talk about money and investments, and all the things that usually filled his days. But right now, all of that seemed meaningless. He was thinking about his daughter, about how he had missed so many of her school plays and recitals because he was always too busy. He was thinking about the important things he had sacrificed for things that weren't important at all. A tear slid down his cheek, and he didn't even try to hide it. Across the room, a young woman in a red dress was holding onto her husband's arm, both of them completely transfixed by the music. They had been fighting earlier that evening, arguing about something small that had somehow turned into something big. But now, listening to this homeless boy play his heart out, all of that anger seemed to melt away. She squeezed her husband's hand, and he squeezed back. No words were needed. The music said everything. Even the security guard who had tried to stop the boy was standing perfectly still, his radio forgotten in his hand. He had worked at this concert hall for 15 years. He had heard professional musicians from all over the world perform on the main stage. But something about this performance was different. Something about this boy, this kid who had been sleeping on the streets just hours ago, was reaching a part of him that no professional had ever touched. The piece built toward its final crescendo. The boy's hands were flying across the keys now, playing with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone so young. The notes filled every corner of the lobby, echoing off the marble floors and the high glass windows. For those few moments, nothing else in the world existed. There was no gala, no crowd, no cameras or champagne or fancy clothes. There was only the music, and the boy who was creating it. Then, with one final chord that seemed to hang in the air forever, the piece came to an end. The boy sat there for a moment, his hands still resting on the keys, his eyes still closed. He was breathing hard, like he had just run a marathon. His whole body was trembling with exhaustion and emotion. For 2 years, he had been carrying this weight inside him. For 2 years, he had been holding on to his grief with nowhere to let it go. And now, finally, he had released it. He had given it to the music, just like his mother had taught him. The silence that followed lasted only a second. Then the lobby erupted. It started with one person clapping, then another. Then suddenly everyone was clapping, applauding with a passion that made the chandeliers shake. People were crying openly, not bothering to wipe their faces. Some of them were standing on their toes to get a better look at the boy. Others were pushing forward, wanting to be closer to whatever miracle they had just witnessed. The boy finally opened his eyes. He looked around at all these strangers, these wealthy, powerful people in their expensive clothes, and he saw something he hadn't expected. He saw tears. He saw admiration. He saw people looking at him not with disgust or pity, but with respect, with awe. The woman in the black dress was the first to reach him. She knelt down beside the piano bench so that her eyes were level with his. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked softly. The boy looked at her. His voice came out rough and broken, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "My mother taught me," he said, "before she died." And somehow, those simple words broke the woman's heart even more than the music had. She reached out and took his hand, holding it gently between both of hers. "Tell me everything," she said. The boy didn't know where to start. He had spent so long being invisible, so long without anyone asking him a single question about his life, that he had almost forgotten how to tell his own story. But the woman was still holding his hand, still looking at him with those kind eyes, and something about her made him feel safe. Made him feel like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone in. So he started at the beginning. He told her about his mother, about how she used to hum while she cooked dinner in their tiny kitchen, about how she would read to him every night before bed, doing different voices for all the characters until he couldn't stop laughing, about how she called him her little Mozart, even when he was just a small kid banging on the piano keys without any idea what he was doing. He told her about the lessons, how his mother would sit beside him for hours, patiently guiding his fingers to the right notes, how she never got angry when he made mistakes, only smiled and told him to try again, how she used to say that music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being honest, about putting your heart into the keys and letting it speak. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them. People had moved closer, wanting to hear what the boy was saying. The woman didn't try to shoo them away. She just kept her eyes on the boy, nodding gently, encouraging him to continue. He told her about the day everything changed. The day his mother came home from the doctor, with a look on her face that he had never seen before. She had tried to hide it from him at first. She told him it was nothing serious, just some tests the doctors wanted to run, but he knew something was wrong. He could see it in the way she moved more slowly, the way she got tired more easily, the way she sometimes stopped in the middle of playing piano and just stared at the keys like she was trying to memorize them. The diagnosis came a few weeks later. The doctors used big words that the boy didn't understand, but he understood enough. His mother was very sick. The kind of sick that medicine couldn't always fix. A woman standing nearby let out a small sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes red and swollen. But the boy kept talking. It was like a dam had broken inside him, and all the words he had been holding back for 2 years were finally rushing out. He told them about the treatments, the hospital visits that seemed to never end, the nights when his mother was too weak to get out of bed, but still asked him to play for her. He would drag a small keyboard into her room and play whatever she wanted to hear. Sometimes, she would close her eyes and smile, and for a moment, she would look like herself again, like the strong, beautiful woman who had taught him everything he knew. He told them about her last days, how she had held his hand and made him promise to never give up on his music, how she had told him that she would always be with him every time he sat down at a piano, how she had smiled at him one last time before closing her eyes for good. The lobby was completely silent now except for the sounds of people crying. Men and women who had walked into this gala thinking about business deals and social connections were now wiping tears from their faces, completely undone by the story of this homeless boy and his mother. The woman in the black dress squeezed his hand tighter. Her own cheeks were wet, but she didn't look away. She wanted to hear all of it. She needed to understand how this extraordinary child had ended up on the streets. So the boy told her about what came next. About the father who showed up at the funeral, smelling like alcohol, who promised to take care of him but disappeared again within a week. About the uncle who took him in only because the state required someone to, who made it clear every single day that the boy was nothing but a burden. About the arguments that got worse and worse until one night the uncle told him to get out and never come back. He told her about his first night on the streets, how scared he had been, huddled behind a dumpster in an alley, jumping at every sound, how he had cried until he had no tears left, then wiped his face and told himself he had to be strong. His mother wouldn't want him to give up, she would want him to survive, and so he had survived. He learned where to find food. He learned which shelters had open beds and which neighborhoods were safe to sleep in. He learned how to become invisible, because invisible meant safe. If nobody saw you, nobody could hurt you. But the hardest part, he told them, wasn't the hunger, or the cold, or the loneliness. The hardest part was not having a piano. For 2 years, he hadn't touched a single key. The music that his mother had put inside him had nowhere to go. It just sat there in his chest, aching and heavy, like a song waiting to be sung. That's why he came to the concert hall every night. Just to hear the music. Just to remember what it felt like to be the boy his mother had believed in. When he finished talking, nobody spoke. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. The boy suddenly felt embarrassed. He had said too much. These people didn't care about his problems. They were rich and powerful and had their own lives to worry about. Why would they care about some homeless kid with a dead mother and a broken heart? But then something happened that he didn't expect. The tall kid who had started all of this pushed through the crowd. His face was different now. The smugness was gone. Replaced by something that looked almost like shame. He stopped a few feet away from the boy, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. I was just being stupid. I'm really sorry." He held out the $100 bill he had waved around earlier. The boy just looked at it. "Keep it," he said. The tall kid's face crumpled. He looked like he might cry himself. "Then, let me do something else. Let me help somehow, please." Before the boy could respond, another voice spoke up. It was the businessman in the expensive suit, the one who had been thinking about his daughter during the performance. "We can all help," he said. He stepped forward, pulling out his wallet. "Whatever this young man needs. School, housing, a new piano. Whatever it takes." Suddenly, more voices joined in. A woman offered to pay for clothes and supplies. An older man mentioned that he sat on the board of a music academy and could get the boy a full scholarship. Someone else was already on their phone, talking about setting up a trust fund. The offers came faster and faster, each person trying to outdo the one before, until the boy's head was spinning. The woman in the black dress stood up and raised her hand. The crowd fell silent again, respecting her authority. "My name is Mrs. Chen," she said, finally introducing herself. "I've spent my entire career finding and nurturing musical talent. I've discovered concert pianists, composers, performers who have played on stages all over the world." She paused, looking down at the boy with an expression of absolute certainty. "But I have never, in all my years, seen raw talent like this. This young man isn't just gifted. He's extraordinary." She turned to face the crowd. "I'm not going to let him go back to the streets. Not tonight. Not ever. If I have to move mountains, I will make sure this boy gets the life he deserves." The crowd erupted into applause again, even louder than before. People were nodding and cheering and calling out their support. The boy sat there on the piano bench, completely overwhelmed. Just an hour ago, he had been invisible. Just an hour ago, he had been nobody. Now, for the first time in 2 years, he felt like somebody again. Mrs. Chen knelt down beside him once more. She put her hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle and warm. "I know you've been through more than anyone your age should ever have to face," she said softly. "But I need you to hear me. Your mother was right about you. You are special. And from this moment on, you're not alone anymore." The boy looked at her. He thought about his mother, about the promise he had made to her. And for the first time since she died, he let himself believe that maybe things really could get better. Maybe this was what she had been preparing him for all along. 6 months later, the boy stood backstage at the Grand Heritage Concert Hall, wearing a brand new suit that fit him perfectly. His hands were shaking, but not from cold this time. Tonight, for the first time in his life, he was going to perform on the main stage. The same stage where world-famous musicians had played. The same stage he used to dream about while sleeping behind dumpsters just a few hundred feet away. Everything had changed so fast that sometimes he still couldn't believe it was real. That first night after the gala, Mrs. Chen had taken him to her home. It was a beautiful house with more rooms than he could count, filled with books and art and 3 different pianos. She had given him his own bedroom with a soft bed and clean sheets that smelled like lavender. He had lain awake for hours that night, afraid to close his eyes in case he woke up and discovered it was all a dream. But it wasn't a dream. The next morning, Mrs. Chen had sat him down at the kitchen table and laid out a plan. She was going to become his legal guardian. She was going to enroll him in the best music academy in the city. She was going to make sure he had everything he needed to develop his talent and build the future his mother had always wanted for him. At first, the boy didn't know how to respond. He had spent so long expecting nothing from the world that kindness felt strange and uncomfortable. He kept waiting for something to go wrong. He kept waiting for Mrs. Chen to change her mind, to realize he was too much trouble, to send him back to the streets where he belonged. But that never happened. Day after day, week after week, Mrs. Chen proved that she meant every word she had said. She drove him to school every morning and picked him up every afternoon. She sat with him while he did his homework, helping him catch up on the 2 years of education he had missed. She bought him books and clothes and everything else he needed, never once making him feel like a charity case. Most importantly, she gave him music. The academy was like nothing he had ever experienced. There were practice rooms with perfect acoustics, and teachers who had performed in concert halls all over the world. There were other students his age who loved music just as much as he did, kids he could actually talk to about the things that mattered to him. For the first time since his mother died, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The teachers were amazed by his talent. They said they had never seen anyone progress so quickly. All those years of training with his mother, all those hours of practice that had seemed so hard at the time, had built a foundation that was stronger than anyone expected. Within a few months, he was playing pieces that students twice his age struggled with. Within a few more months, the academy asked if he would be interested in giving a solo performance. That was how he ended up here, backstage at the concert hall, trying to calm his racing heart. Mrs. Chen appeared beside him. She was wearing an elegant blue dress, and her gray hair was pinned up the same way it had been on the night they met. She looked at him with the same kind eyes that had changed his life 6 months ago. "How are you feeling?" she asked. The boy took a deep breath. "Scared," he admitted. "What if I mess up? What if everyone realizes I don't belong here?" Mrs. Chen smiled gently. She reached out and straightened his tie, a small gesture that reminded him so much of his mother that his chest ached. "Let me tell you something," she said. "I've been in this business for a very long time. I've seen talented people fail because they didn't believe in themselves. And I've seen people with half your gift succeed because they never gave up. Talent matters, but heart matters more. And you, my dear boy, have more heart than anyone I've ever met." She took his hands in hers, just like she had done that first night. "Your mother is watching tonight. I truly believe that. And she is so proud of you. Not because you're about to perform on this stage, not because of your talent or your future or any of that. She's proud because you survived, because you kept going when most people would have given up, because you kept her memory alive in your heart, even when everything else was falling apart." The boy felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them back. He couldn't cry now. Not before the biggest moment of his life. A stagehand appeared in the doorway. "5 minutes," she said. Mrs. Chen squeezed his hands one more time, then stepped back. "Go show them who you are," she said. The boy nodded. He turned and walked toward the stage entrance, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of the audience. The concert hall was completely sold out. Over 2,000 people were sitting in those velvet seats, waiting to hear him play. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The cold nights on the streets, the hunger and the loneliness, the moment when those cruel teenagers had dared him to touch the piano, never imagining what would happen next. Every step of that journey had led to this moment. Every hardship had been preparing him for right now. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent, and the boy walked out onto the stage. The applause that greeted him was warm and welcoming. He could see faces in the front rows, people smiling up at him with encouragement. He spotted Mrs. Chen in her reserved seat, her hands clasped together like she was praying. Beside her sat several of the people from the gala night, the businessman who had started the fund, the couple who had stopped fighting, even the tall kid who had apologized. They had all come to support him, but there was one empty seat in the front row. Mrs. Chen had insisted on it. A single chair with a white rose resting on the cushion. For his mother, the boy sat down at the grand piano. It was the same instrument he had played 6 months ago. The beautiful piano that had seemed so impossible to touch. Now, it felt like an old friend. He rested his fingers on the keys and closed his eyes. For a moment, everything was quiet. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then he began to play. The music that filled the concert hall was different from what he had played that first night. It was still emotional, still powerful, but there was something new in it, something lighter. The grief was still there, woven into every note, but it wasn't crushing anymore. It had transformed into something beautiful, into gratitude, into hope, into a message that seemed to say, "I made it, Mom. I kept my promise." The audience sat in stunned silence as the music washed over them. Some people cried. Some people smiled. Some people just closed their eyes and let themselves be carried away by the sound. It was the kind of performance that people would talk about for years to come. The kind of performance that changes lives. When the final note faded away, there was a moment of perfect stillness. Then the audience erupted into the loudest applause the boy had ever heard. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering and calling out his name. The standing ovation went on and on, wave after wave of appreciation and love. The boy stood up from the piano bench and bowed. Tears were streaming down his face now, but he didn't try to hide them. These weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, tears of relief, tears for everything he had lost, and everything he had found. He looked out at the crowd, at all these people who believed in him. He looked at Mrs. Chen, who was crying and clapping harder than anyone else. He looked at the empty chair with the white rose, and in his heart, he spoke to his mother one last time. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for loving me enough to give me this gift. I promise I'll make you proud, every single day." For the rest of my life, the applause continued as the boy stood on that stage, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. He had walked through fire and come out the other side. He had lost everything and somehow found even more, and this was only the beginning.